name is Pam Gay. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for 33 years, and I was recently elected in actually I took office in January of 2014, was elected last November to be the New York County Coroner.
Okay. And since you've been the county coroner, what has been the biggest issue that you've had come up as far as drugs are concerned?
Well, I knew that we had a drug problem here in York County, but suicide has traditionally been a bigger problem than drugs, although drugs has been a close second, drug deaths. And for the first time in the history of the York County Coroner's Office, over the last 2 months, the drug deaths have actually superseded suicides, as well as home and play accidents, things that occur during recreational activities, that kind of thing, those type of accidents. So for the first time, we're seeing that drug deaths are much bigger concern than what they were, obviously, for decades. Never have drug deaths superseded all those other causes of accidental death in York County. So we are actually, as of October 31st, we hit 80 drug deaths that are confirmed in York. And out of those 80, now as of today, actually, we have 40 confirmed heroin deaths and another 6 that we're suspecting. We actually had one this morning. So it's a big problem in York. I sensed that it was a bit of a problem, but it wasn't until I sat down and actually met with my chief deputy, Claude Stabley. Even before I took office, we met about some of the concerns and the health trends that we were seeing. And he brought to my attention that he felt that this heroin was becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And actually, over the first 6 weeks that I was in office, we confirmed that it was indeed going to be probably one of our biggest health trends, one of our biggest concerns for this next year. I actually met with the DA at the time, DA Kearney and Assistant DA Sunday. We talked about our concerns, especially for prosecution, in how one small way of trying to combat the problem. And I know you can't arrest the problem away. That's a lot of controversy there, and I understand that. But we felt that if we could send a message that we weren't going to tolerate it in our community, at least to some of the dealers, that maybe that would help in some ways. And then at the same time, while it doesn't bring that person back for the families, it hopefully gives them some answers and some resolution to the fact, for instance, a lot of these individuals are left alone to die, and what we're interested in trying to find is the main dealer who's profiting from this, not so much the people that are using and sharing. And so the DA has traditionally had some difficulty with those prosecutions because we traditionally in this office, up until I took office, we're not doing autopsies on most of our heroin-related deaths. We were only doing toxicologies. And the defense can always come at you and say, hey, how do we know nothing else caused the death? How do we know that that person didn't have a medical condition, a heart condition, or a kidney condition, or something that led to their death? How can you know for sure that it was heroin? And one of the things that has been recommended for the last few years by the National Association of Medical Examiners is to do autopsies on all drug-related deaths so that prosecutions can be more easily carried out. In that way, hopefully you can say that nothing else caused the death but the heroin. I felt, after discussing it with Chief Deputy Stabley, that maybe when we would do autopsies on all drug deaths, that might be a little much for the county to handle at once after not doing them at all on drug deaths. So we felt, well, let's try and see, maybe we'll work on the more easily prosecutable ones, and they're still not easy, but maybe the illicit drug-related deaths. So that's why we decided to start autopsying all the heroin-related deaths. And there are several other counties in the area that do something similar, that do postmortems on heroin-related, and some of them actually do postmortems on all drug deaths. So we're still a little bit behind with some of that, but at the same time I felt this way we'll hopefully start talking about it and maybe alert the media to why we're doing this, and then hopefully gain some public knowledge and support for it. I know it still is kind of controversial, but we do have several cases on the books right now as a result of this charged drug delivery resulting in death. And that basically is partially due to the fact that we have proceeded with autopsying those individuals. So, you know, it's one small way to try and send a message. We don't know for sure yet if it's going to make a big difference. It hasn't been tested in this community, but we're going to see. And we're hoping that that's just something that will help. And in further discussions with the DA's office over the next couple months, initial few months of my time here, we just decided that Assistant DA Sunday had seen that other counties were getting involved with more education in the community. And Chief Deputy Stabley and I had been going out a little bit on our own and doing some education regarding heroin awareness, trying to let the community know that this is becoming a real problem. And actually it first started in Dallastown High School in some health classes back in May, towards the end of the school year. They were the first to invite us out to talk about this. And then we proceeded to Crossroads United Methodist in Crossroads Borough, which is, you know, really unheard of. Most churches don't want to have you come in and talk about heroin. But we felt that the interest was building, that people were understanding that this was not a problem of junkies out on the street necessarily in downtown York, that this could be in their community and was in many of their communities. And it can happen to anybody from all socioeconomic levels. So that kind of became our mission, to really show that this can happen to anyone. We need to be aware of it. It's happening countywide, and it's going, if it hasn't affected you directly in your family, it will one day, soon. So the DA's office was really getting behind this education and as another way of trying to combat the problem, raising awareness. And so Assistant DA Sunday got the idea, after he'd seen what other counties were doing, of starting the task force. So now we have a heroin task force that was started in July, and it consists of members of the community. You have legislators, you have physicians, you have addiction specialists, we have law enforcement on it, as well as a mother who lost her child to heroin. We have other individuals who help us and appear at our events, who are active mothers who have their children in recovery right now. They come to all our events, and you know, we're really trying to fine-tune who's on the task force, but we're really right now trying to learn as much as we can about the problems in our community that exist when it comes to heroin. And one of the things that we're learning quickly is that there's not enough treatment, we don't feel, at this point. There's treatment that is capped, especially methadone, medication-assisted treatment. There is lots of counseling available, but there's not a lot of appointments that are able to, you know, people can't get into the counseling as well as what they would like to. So, you know, we're hearing from a lot of families how frustrating it is even to get their children into detox. And when I say children, I'm talking a lot of times they're young adults. Thankfully, we haven't seen too many heroin deaths yet in the younger population, the high school age. However, we have lost 2 17-year-olds. We've lost 4 under the age of 20. And our concern is that that's going to start to creep down, because we hear that the use in the high school community is higher than what we think. And so that concerns us, obviously. I know that a lot of younger people tend to smoke and snort, thinking that that's not going to be as big of an issue, that they won't die from that. We actually have lost some older individuals, when I say older, middle age, from snorting. So you can die from that. And we're trying to send that message out to the young people so that they know that that is still not a safe practice. And but I think they think because not as many of them have died from doing those things as injecting, as in the 20s to 40s year old population that we see right now, I think they think they're safer. So we're really trying to get the message out, trying to get to where we can hopefully get into high schools with the Heroin Task Force. We're looking at some of the curriculums that exist to bring into the school districts, because a lot of the school districts want something that's proven tested, that's worked, and we've learned of some that they're using in some of the other task forces in those communities, especially Delaware County. We're looking at theirs right now. They've had a lot of good results. So we haven't decided on what we're going to bring into the schools yet. For now, what we're doing is we're just basically going around throughout the county and doing these larger town hall forums. We just had one in Delta where 200 people showed up. And we have another one scheduled at Crispus Attucks, November 19th, I believe, Wednesday night. So that's our next one, and we're going to get actually into the city, which is a goal of mine, been a goal of mine for a while, to get into the city and talk about this problem. So that's how I got involved, from a nurse who was dealing mostly with sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse type situations. That's where I came from. And I've had a huge education in how to read toxicologies. I do a lot of discussing the results with families, which is hard. Not as hard as the day you tell them that their child is dead, but it's probably the second worst one, the second most difficult thing. So they're going to get that in there,
Okay,
actually.
Cut it here for a second.
Yeah.
When we go back on, what I do want to ask you about, I mean, you just floored me with something there. Because even the counselor I just talked to today said that most ODs are still prescription, and you just threw me for a loop there.
That they're actually about half and half, and almost soon creeping up there. Now, I will tell you there.
So the counselors aren't even in touch with the
Well,
reality.
that's ODs, but maybe they're giving you the ODs that have survived too. You got to remember, I only see the deaths. So when they say ODs, a lot of times that means somebody that's OD'd and survived too. So
How would they have records of that information?
that's a good question, because we've been talking about trying to get that information ourselves on the task force.
I can't.
And I think I wrote you in the email, I think actually the only way you could get that information, and I don't know how much of it is public. I mean, I would think they could at least get you numbers. I mean, obviously they can't get you names, but I think they could get you numbers. But I would think you'd almost have to check with the various EMS agencies that exist.
Every medical clinic, every hospital.
Yeah, and then the hospitals to follow up and see if they truly survived. So I think it's really hard for, how do they know that for sure? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I can tell you what the deaths are.
They go by a nationwide status.
Right.
And I believe that's what they're still referencing.
But we've been talking here, even on the task force, how it's really hard to put a number on the overdoses, because there's so many different entities that treat them, and then who has the final follow-up to see that they really survived?
Could have been a family doctor.
Yeah. So I think it's probably very difficult to figure out exactly how many overdoses survive and how many do not. I mean, obviously we know how many do not, but how do you compare that to the ones that, they save? How do we know what that ratio is?
Well, according to SAMH, it's SAMHSA.
Right.
The statistics I read said that for every fatal OD, there are 8 non-fatal ODs.
On average in the country, is that what they're using?
On average in the country, based on a 24-hour or more stay to those hospitals that are participating, cooperating. Of course, I told you the state of Pennsylvania hasn't cooperated with SAMHSA since 2009.
Right, which I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that until you told me. So, so I think those statistics are probably pretty skewed.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So even if it's it could be a 12-hour stay with Narcan, because those statistics are still 2, 3, 4 years old.
Yeah.
And Narcan stay may be less than 12 hours or 14 or 16 hours. So even if they were cooperating, still wouldn't tell you the amount of non-fatal ODs.
Right.
And it's hard to get, because there must be a ratio of fatal to non-fatal ODs to how many people are addicted.
And I think even 911 dispatchers, I don't know that they ever get a whole lot of feedback as to who was saved and who was not, So I do think, like you said, you almost have to go to the end user, or the end recipient of that care. So it would be you know, the hospital and the family physician. To me, that's the only way you can get those true
And
statistics.
I've attempted to do that,
So,
but been
and
unsuccessful.
of course HIPAA, yeah, I'm sure some of them,
Yes.
they're not going to release names, of course, but you know, you would think that numbers would help. You know, it would help give us a better idea of what we're dealing with. But, you know, I release what I can, obviously, from this office, but I only have a small fragment of what we're really dealing with, you know. Yes, we see the final results in here. We see the tragic end. But what about all the people that have attempted and been, you know, saved, but then go back and use again, you know? And we actually had a case just in the last few days where an individual did get Narcan and ended up coming back home and actually succeeded this time with his heroin and died, unfortunately. Who's to say whether that was withdrawal, whether that was a suicidal wish? It's, you know, sometimes some of these cases are really hard to figure out, you know.
The other side of the coin, of course, are complications such as hepatitis, tuberculosis,
Right.
autoimmune disorder,
All the
AIDS.
heart valve lining issues, yeah, just
Exact
lots of
organ
diseases
failures.
that they acquire, yeah. There's a lot of long-term, and even those we have no way of knowing in this office, you know. That probably would have to be all related to, when I'm talking about that they survive and have those issues. If they die, some of that will show up on autopsy, but actually if they're a relatively newer user, some of that won't really show up on autopsy as easily. It's harder to find. But there's definitely usually some cardiac effects from people that have been using for a while. And you know, that's generally where we see
How
it more.
about brain damage?
You know, most of our, because they die, you know, once in a while they'll talk about cerebral edema. Maybe we've had a couple that who've lingered at the hospital for a few days or weeks and die that way. So then they have brain damage, yeah. But you know, we're not seeing. I mean, we see some things with the brain, but not necessarily what you would think in some of the short-term users that we see. Some of them that haven't been using as long, and that's really what a lot of them are. Maybe they were using prescription drugs for a while and they've recently crossed over. We do have a few who, you know, are in their 40s. We even had one that was in her 60s, believe it or not, which is our oldest one that we've had, who have some long-term issues. But we haven't seen too much in the way of permanent brain damage. I really haven't. You know, I hate to say that because I don't want people thinking it's safe to use. It's not safe to use. But where we see the biggest changes are the lungs. You know, especially when they die, they have a lot of pulmonary edema because basically they stop that breathing and then the fluid takes over and then they go into cardiac arrest as a result of that. So, you know, and it just basically affects those receptors in the brain that control the respirations. That's what heroin does. And that's what Narcan goes into that area and totally reverses it when it's given at the right time. It can actually, you know, basically push that out and take the place and cause that person to wake up and start breathing, which is why they call it a miracle drug. It's been around for, you know, a couple decades. We've been using it in the hospital for a while. And it is. I mean, any of us that have seen it in use will tell you it's amazing how it works. But, you know, with very little side effects. So we were, as a task force, we were very united behind the recent legislation to get Narcan into the hands of law enforcement, and also the Good Samaritan legislation that went along with it. We were very supportive of that and glad to see one small step towards trying to get this epidemic under control. Or at least, you know, in our mind, you know, we're trying to think of a goal for the task force for next year. We're trying to think what our goal for this year is to compare for next year. And we feel, basically, we just sat around and talked and said, if we can have one less death next year, we'll feel like we've made at least a little progress. Would we like to have a lot, you know, many less deaths? Yes. But we're being realistic. We've been told that, especially with the crackdown through the database, the pharmacy database, prescription database.
Can you explain that to me? Does that stop somebody from doctor shopping only in Pennsylvania, or will it affect other states as well?
Well, I'm not really sure what information is available across state or how that works just yet. I think you need to probably talk to your legislators about that. I do know that we were state 48, I believe, to approve the bill. You might want to check into my numbers to be sure, but I think we were 48 or 49. So it is definitely in existence in other states. And I do feel that it's one small way, again, of trying to combat the prescription drug problem in this country. We think there's a lot of over-medicating going on. A lot of people go from doctor to doctor and they get, they doctor shop, as we say, and they pharmacy shop. And right now, that pharmacy or that physician did not have the ability to go in and see where else that patient has gone or what other drugs they're on. And with this new bill, this new law, beginning, I believe, November 29th, 60 days after it was signed into bill, or signed into law, it will give physicians and pharmacies the ability to actually, I don't know if it's November, that was actually just signed into law, forget that. I'm mixing it up with my other, the Good Samaritan legislation. The Good Samaritan legislation takes effect November 29th. The prescription database bill, I'm not sure exactly when that takes effect, but it's soon. Usually they're 60 to 90 days, these bills, but I'm not sure exactly, so I'll give you homework to do, you can look that up.
Okay.
When it does come into law, we do feel that there will be maybe an initial even rise, we're concerned about that in heroin, because some people, because of that crackdown, may resort to heroin ultimately that hadn't ordinarily considered it, maybe. But at the same time, it's one small way to get a handle on the prescription drug problem in our country, which goes right hand in hand with the heroin, we feel. There are a lot of our individuals who die that we know were at one time users of prescription drugs and made that changeover, whether it was because they tried it and they thought it worked just as well and was cheaper, sometimes it's economics, or whether it was just they couldn't maybe get a refill as easily anymore, they were having trouble finding the pills on the black market, and then again the economics behind that, because we're being told that an oxy is like $1 a milligram, whereas, so you got a couple oxys a day, you could be having a $250 habit, versus, 1 to 2 to 3 bags of heroin, you're talking $10 to $30 a day. It's a big difference. So it wouldn't be unusual for people to look at that and say, hey, I think I'll start trying this method, I think what keeps some people from crossing over that line is just the whole idea of injecting, which to many people is a dirty or, gross thing. We don't want to learn how to do that. But what some people will do is get other people to inject it for them into their veins, and eventually many of them end up learning to inject themselves. So it's a mess. We started using drugs that were initially prescribed for long-term, intractable, terminal pain, such as with cancer. And we started using those over the last couple years now for, surgery, oral surgery. People are taking these strong opiates that were originally intended for people at the last stages of their life, and we're not learning how to live with a little pain, or at least realize that maybe you're not going to be totally pain-free. And then you run into the problem of the accreditation for the hospitals, the organization, JCO, that came in and created that fifth vital sign, as they say, I believe, where the pain level, are you at a 0, are you at a 10? And that we felt like we always had to have it at a 0. And it's just what in our society tells us that we can't experience a little pain as a normal part of life. And I think we've really gotten to the point in our life where we all feel that we need to be pain-free through every stage of our life. And, unfortunately now we've created this, and it's backfired, because, we now have the heroin epidemic that we do. We think it all goes hand in hand.
That explains that part of it. However, it's proliferated into every single high school.
Yeah.
And now it's in a lot of middle schools.
You mean the prescription drug problem?
Well, heroin,
Yeah.
and illegal
yeah.
drugs and all of it
Yeah.
in every high school. Now it's going into the middle schools, and it would not be surprising in a couple of years that it's in elementary schools.
Yeah, that scares me. We actually had a decedent who we learned had been using heroin since he was 9 years old, and he died at 17. That's just mind-boggling to me that a 9-year-old would be using heroin. Now, I do believe he grew up in a family where he saw substance abuse, so that probably, unfortunately, was where he learned some of it. But yeah, it is concerning, and we have to figure out a way to bring the message into the elementary level in not such a graphic way, I'm sure, but we have to figure out a way to at least help them realize that, you know, drugs are not good. And drugs, yes, while they have some great benefit, generally, you know, we shouldn't be using them unless we absolutely need them and unless they're prescribed by a doctor. But you know, even now, with being prescribed by a doctor, we're still facing problems. So we're hoping that with the prescription database bill that doctors will be more accountable, and other doctors will make them be more accountable. Hey, you know, yeah, your patient is asking me for this, and I see that you already have written a prescription, so I'm not going to give them anything, that kind of thing, you know, so that we've changed the culture a little bit that exists right now. And but, you know, yeah, we definitely have to bring this message somehow into the younger grades eventually here. We have to figure out a way. And there are some programs out there that have some things that they're doing, and we're looking into some of that too. But yeah, it's prescription drug problem in schools is still a very real problem, and it is turning into a heroin problem from what I hear. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that, but that's what I hear. But I am hearing that there are these parties that they go to where they throw all the pills into a bowl, they pull out what they want, and it's like a recreational fun thing to them. They get them from medicine cabinets and, you know, their parents and their relatives and friends, and these skittle parties or these farming parties, whatever they call them. And we've actually lost some teens in York County as a result of that. So, you know, it does happen, and it's a dangerous thing, and it's really a fine line between that prescription drug abuse as a teen and then the heroin use that sometimes occurs when they're a teen, but often occurs by the time they hit their 20s to 40s is where we're seeing it. So
Would it, as part of the plan, I'm just throwing something out here, that other kids could report, because these kids I've talked to, and I haven't met one yet in a single high school where heroin's not present, and a number of middle schools who tell me that it exists in their schools, that they could have some way of contacting a source, an authority, without being a snitch, so to speak.
yeah, and that is some of the concern, and we talk about that actually, and some of that is brought out in these programs that the schools allow to come in and do a little bit of training and with the kids and the parents. Yeah, we got to change that mentality. I don't know, really, you know, it's not easy where you go tell a responsible adult or a teacher or a guidance counselor, you know, and they get you help. And we actually met with a school district on Friday who's being very proactive in wanting to know what to do. The first school district that's actually, other than Doylestown, let us in to explain this. This was Eastern New York School District. And I do think that that is some of their concern, is how do we help the kids who really want to report but are afraid of any retribution, labeling as a snitch, whatever. My own son experienced that actually at college because he had a roommate who was a heroin addict. And actually I literally flew to Chicago to move him out because there was some concerns, you know, I was concerned for my son's life, to tell you the truth. because the resident advisor had let it slip who snitched. And that was very frustrating to me when they promised me that he was going to be protected. So if that's happening at college, that certainly can be happening at the, at the middle school or high school level. And we have to figure out ways to make kids feel safe, that they feel that they can report those things. I don't know what the answer is yet, but I know that there are programs that really talk about, try to address that. So.
Have you looked at the Drug Free America DVDs that are free and available?
Yeah, we have, and we use the one regularly in our presentation, the one with the 5 or 6 kids, and some of them have died, and there's one who's in recovery, or 2 in recovery, and there's one that has brain damage. I don't know if you had seen that.
Did you get the teacher DVDs yet?
No, we haven't, no, but yeah.
But
But we've used those. We do our own PowerPoint right now, just because we're trying to get out the coroner's office. We've been doing it for a while, and we've refined it. We actually have a mother of who lost her son to heroin who starts out the video, the PowerPoint with a video, and then we close with that drugfree.org video, which is very powerful and actually utilizes some people from within the York, Lancaster, Harrisburg community, as you probably know. And my chief deputy is in that video, so we use that pretty heavily, and we recently discovered it. We knew that they had shot that video a couple years ago, but we didn't realize till recently with these PowerPoint demonstrations that we're doing, these presentations, that they existed. And we're pretty active. We work with Phil Bauer too, who's been very vocal and actually appears in that video, having lost his son. So, yeah, great resource. Drugfree.org has tons of great literature and handouts that we use at all our presentations.
The brochures.
Yeah,
and
the guide that shows like all the prescription drugs and what they look like,
mm-hmm.
and what to expect, when your kid's using those things.
And
Parents love that.
I forget the name of the cartoon character that they have in their brochures, like for elementary level kids and so forth.
Yeah.
Very, very informative.
Yeah, I haven't tapped into the elementary resources yet because we haven't been to an elementary school yet, but I do have a very, I think a 6th grade class that I'm going to present to in a couple months, and I'm looking at some of that information for them, some of the middle school stuff. But we've actually had parents bring their young kids out to our presentations, and we just basically tell them we're not going to water this down. If you're bringing your child here, we're assuming that you're, prepared to show them this. Some parents have walked out if it gets too graphic, but generally most parents, they're making their kids sit and watch it, and I applaud them for that, because we show some, we don't use real cases, but we use pictures from Google that are on the internet of what a heroin addict looks like when we find them dead, and with the color changes and clutching the syringes. So we don't mince anything. We really are, we want to be realistic, and while it may be graphic, we want people to know that this is what happens. If you use use, period. Doesn't matter, if it's too much. And some people, they think, oh, they just use too much heroin. And we keep trying to tell them over and over again, any little bit of heroin can kill. And now, obviously, if somebody's been clean and they don't have that tolerance anymore, they especially are susceptible to any little bit of heroin. People that have been using longer, they tend to be able to use larger quantities over time because they develop a tolerance, but you never know when that particular batch of heroin might have fentanyl mixed in it. It's not like, as my chief deputy says, it's not like somebody's sitting in a drug, like they would be in a drugstore and measuring out everything exactly the way it's supposed to be with the exact same ingredients that they do in a pharmaceutical company. This is not controlled in any way, shape, or form. And there's all kinds of awful bad things that can be mixed in with it, and they could be selling you rat poisoning and you don't know it. So
this is the one thing that I found with Molly, which is predominantly used at college campuses, and they take that like candy. And for the most part, it's crack or heroin, and it's no longer an extract of ecstasy. But because it's stamped a particular way, they believe it and they take it. And,
right.
And there's a lot of toxins mixed in with it, but Molly is no longer Molly. Ecstasy is no longer ecstasy. And so they'll take anything and put it in their mouth.
Right.
And I can understand, to some degree, the level of, maybe perhaps trauma or whatever that somebody became addicted. But I don't understand how a parent or parents can have a child who's in elementary, middle, or high school and not realize that child is an addict. I don't even see how that's conceivable. Do you?
I understand what you're saying, but I do think it happens, I think that we have in our minds for years this image of what we think an addict is. So if our kid doesn't fit that picture, it's easy for us to deny that they're using. I think probably in retrospect, when they look back, they see and realize the signs were there. And I think some of the parents that work with us right now would tell you that, but they just don't want to believe that of their child. And some of these kids excel in sports, or they're so popular, and they're cheerleading. We've seen so many from different walks of life, and then the parents will say, when I started to see subtle changes and it wasn't registering, I thought that maybe they were depressed because of the breakup with their boyfriend, or they just had different friends all of a sudden, but they don't put the two and two together at that time. And now looking back, these parents are our strongest advocates with going out and telling other parents, hey, these are the things you need to be aware of. If any of these things are happening, you need to go through your kids' drawers. You need to actually see if there's tinfoil wrappers laying around, and if there's burned spoons, and you need to check and see if they're hiding anything in their switchboard or the outlet covers, and the drop tiles. And you need to do what you should be diligent as a parent, And yes, is it going to, are some of the kids going to get mad? But you're the parent. You're not their friend, and it's hard because a lot of them want to be their friend, and they just can't believe that their kid is capable of those things.
The one consensus that I found, although we get a lot of conflicting information with counselors, but the one general consensus I found with all counselors is that the biggest problem with kids becoming addicted is poor parenting. And what you just described there, they would classify as well as poor parenting.
Yeah.
Where they're letting their kid have everything they want, and they are trying to be their best friend.
Yeah, and I would say that probably most of those parents felt that they were doing the best they could under the situation, under the circumstances, and they felt that they weren't necessarily being a poor parent, but they just maybe were naive. And I think that's probably a better way of saying it, because like I said, I think a kid can come from the best parents and be a heroin addict. And parents that are very involved and wanting to know what's going on in their kid's life, but there's a side of them that they hide from their parents. And, it's just, it becomes a sneaky lifestyle, really. There's lying that goes on. They can live a double life to a certain point, and then it catches up with them, as we all know. But so I think there are parents that just don't care, and those kids fall by the wayside as a result of that, unfortunately. But I think there are also parents who are just so concerned and caring, and maybe they're not checking their kids' drawers just yet, and maybe they're a little too trusting. But I think that's really what it is more than anything. I think it's a naivety, because they just can't imagine that their child would ever do those things. So why would I even ask or go through their drawers or check to see who they're hanging out with, because I trust them. We've never had any problems. And so I think it's more of a naivety.
With the preponderance and the continued increased access that they have to these drugs, it's a fatal mistake if a parent becomes naive to that.
Definitely. And like I said, these parents now in turn have become advocates for really, and they do a great job, much better than myself standing up or law enforcement. They do a much better job of educating other parents. And so we utilize these parents in any way that we can in our presentations. And I think some of the curriculums that we're looking at bringing into the schools utilize these type of parents. I know there's some controversy. Some people think scare tactics don't work. But most of us on the task force at this point do feel that you do have to be real, you do have to be graphic, and for some kids that is what it takes. And especially if you can get to the younger kids with those things before they get to the point where they really could care less about you standing up there, when they become that older teenager and, can't believe I'm being forced to go to this thing, or whatever. We feel that they definitely can work, especially for the middle school and maybe even the elementary, but the middle school especially, and junior high can be reached that way. So we are looking at programs that use those very real tactics.
And Meth Project proved that very well in their research-based program out in Montana.
Yeah.
And that's all about graphic and they used research-based evidence and commercials, billboards, short films, posters, the internet, and so forth. Because I think there's so much focus today on treatment, yet there's almost nothing on prevention.
Yeah, well, and that's
awareness. And
it takes all, the prevention, education, and awareness. Treatment is definitely a component, but when we're out in the public, that's what we're really focusing on, is the prevention. Educating about prevention and being aware of what's around you, and it's definitely something that is a huge part of this, as well as the treatment, as well as the law enforcement component. To some extent, we do believe you can't arrest your way out of this problem. We know that. We're trying to show a different tone with the addict, those that do survive. Drug treatment courts exist, and for some people that really does help and work. And we're trying to. There's actually some probation individuals involved through our Heroin Task Force too. So we're trying to think of ways to reach out to that community to help those kids, get them on the right track, and hopefully that they make some changes in their life. And but at the same time, realizing that there's ramifications for what they've done, but hopefully also realize that they're young and they can hopefully be rehabilitated. And there's things that we can do to work with them. And
what is recovery? Do you have a definition for that? Because
recovery?
A lot of parents, the public in general believes that this is just weak. They're weak-minded.
Yeah, we actually had an individual tell us at the last meeting that we had. I would have to say that maybe there was a time in my life when I felt that way. Long ago, but I've learned that opiate addiction is so different than a lot of substances. Not that other substances aren't addictive, and they are, and it can be just as difficult to break those substances. I understand that, but when I had it explained to me about what opiates do to the brain and how they actually rewire it, and then I've read lots of research on it that supports that. It made me understand that this is a much bigger problem than what we envision, and it is not necessarily a weak-minded person. It's somebody who just tends to be more susceptible to opiates than me. I don't feel good when I take, I took one Vicodin for my foot surgery and threw the rest away. So I just think about how so many of us have drugs laying around our house. We don't think about the fact that because we don't ever want to use them again, but why do we keep them in our cabinets, and it's just going to lead to other people coming through who do have the desire or feel good with opiates in a way that's opposite of what we have. Sort of like Benadryl was explained to me that way. Benadryl, for some people, it makes them really sleepy. Actually, for most people, it does. So we don't like to take it very often. You're not supposed to be operating heavy machinery. And then you have the opposite effect on some people where it just totally wires them. And that's actually what opiates do, not so much I mean, there's that hyper alertness when they first use, but then they get sleepy and nod. But the effect, while it's pleasing to some, it's not so pleasing to others. We don't like the way it makes us feel. Well, let's try and see, maybe we'll work on the more easily prosecutable ones, and they're still not easy, but maybe the illicit drug related deaths. So that's why we decided to start autopsying all the heroin related deaths. And there are several other counties in the area that do something similar, that do postmortems on heroin related, and some of them actually do postmortems on all drug deaths. So we're still a little bit behind with some of that, but at the same time I felt this way we'll hopefully start talking about it and maybe alert the media to why we're doing this, and then hopefully gain some public knowledge and support for it. I know it still is kind of controversial, but we do have several cases on the books right now as a result of this charged drug delivery resulting in death. And that basically is partially due to the fact that we have proceeded with autopsying those individuals. So, it's one small way to try and send a message. We don't know for sure yet if it's going to make a big difference. It hasn't been tested in this community, but we're going to see. And we're hoping that, it's a big problem in York. I sensed that it was a bit of a problem, but it wasn't until I sat down and actually met with my chief deputy, Claude Stabley. Even before I took office, we met about some of the concerns and the health trends that we were seeing, and he brought to my attention that he felt that this heroin was becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And actually, over the first 6 weeks that I was in office, we confirmed that it was indeed going to be probably one of our biggest health trends, one of our biggest concerns for this next year. I actually met with the DA at the time, DA Kearney and Assistant DA Sunday. We talked about our concerns, especially for prosecution, in how one small way of trying to combat the problem. And I know you can't arrest the problem away. That's a lot of controversy there, and I understand that. But we felt that if we could send a message that we weren't going to tolerate it in our community, at least to some of the dealers, that maybe that would help in some ways. And then at the same time, while it doesn't bring that person back for the families, it hopefully gives them some answers and some resolution to the fact.
Since you've been the county coroner, what has been the biggest issue that you've had come up as far as drugs are concerned?
Well, I knew that we had a drug problem here in York County, but suicide has traditionally been a bigger problem than drugs, although drugs has been a close second, drug deaths. And for the first time in the history of the York County Coroner's Office, over the last 2 months, the drug deaths have actually superseded suicides, as well as home and play accidents, things that occur during recreational activities, that kind of thing, those type of accidents. So for the first time, we're seeing that drug deaths are a much bigger concern than what they were, obviously, for decades. Never have drug deaths superseded all those other causes of accidental death in York County. So we are actually, as of October 31st, we hit 80 drug deaths that are confirmed in York. And out of those 80, now as of today, actually, we have 40 confirmed heroin deaths and another 6 that we're suspecting. We actually had one this morning. So, for instance, a lot of these individuals are left alone to die. And what we're interested in trying to find is the main dealer who's profiting from this, not so much the people that are using and sharing. And so the DA has traditionally had some difficulty with those prosecutions because we traditionally in this office, up until I took office, we're not doing autopsies on most of our heroin-related deaths. We were only doing toxicologies. And the defense can always come at you and say, hey, how do we know nothing else caused the death? How do we know that that person didn't have a medical condition, a heart condition, or a kidney condition, or something that led to their death? How can you know for sure that it was heroin? And one of the things that has been recommended for the last few years by the National Association of Medical Examiners is to do autopsies on all drug-related deaths so that prosecutions can be more easily carried out. In that way, hopefully you can say that nothing else caused the death but the heroin. I felt, after discussing it with Chief Deputy Stabley, that maybe when we would do autopsies on all drug deaths, that might be a little much for the county to handle at once after not doing them at all on drug deaths. So we felt my name is Pam Gay. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for 33 years, and I was recently elected in actually I took office in January of 2014, was elected last November to be the New York County Coroner.
Okay. And